Welcome, folks, to Aliant's presentation on cross-border M&A transactions. With me today is Peter Payne. Peter is the head of Aliant's China office and a highly experienced corporate M&A attorney. Peter was educated in the United States. He has practiced law for many years in the United States as the general counsel for Nissan in North America. So he's a very rare Chinese business lawyer who is both very well versed in law in China and doing business in China, but also in the United States, which makes it very easy for Western companies to work with Peter and his team. So Peter, today we're going to run through a few questions and shedding some light on what it's like to do M&A transactions in China. What should Western companies and business partners watch out for? So what would you say are the three most interesting, remarkable business culture aspects in China that folks should watch out for?
Yeah, well, great. First of all, thank you, Jacob. Glad to be here. The three really unusual business culture or practices in China are really the following. Number one, business relationship, doing business is not just what's on the four corners of a contract. A lot of it is based on what is known as guanxi. Guanxi is essentially defined as relationship between the parties. If you have good relationship, if the other party trusts you, then the contract and the negotiation for the contract moves forward very quickly and very positively. But if you say, I hate the guy, I don't like the guy, but look, I need his products, I'm going to sign the contract, that's not going to go very far, because most Chinese business people do not rely on the words of the contract, but rely on, I'm looking at the guy, and do I trust the other guy? The second thing to keep in mind is the face culture. When you're negotiating, don't make the other guy feel like, he is stupid. Don't make the other guy lose face in front of particularly younger negotiators or parties on the other side. Acknowledge the other person. Give the other person face. If the other person says, I want to have A, B, C, and D, don't say, you know what? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. That's not a good start. What you want to do is acknowledge it and maybe say, well, have you considered? And so that kind of negotiation tactics is very critical. And then number three has to do with the idea of you need to be very focused on talking to the other person in a way that is not very much bragging. In the Chinese culture, humbleness, humility, and staying silent on many items is a very important part of the business practice in China. I think it is important to keep in mind that when the other party says, oh, yes, it doesn't mean they agree. It just means they heard you. And so if you want to be sure to understand something, repeat it and say, this is what you want to do, and acknowledge it. And sometimes don't force an answer. Let them think it through, because there's an old joke. When do the Chinese start negotiating? After they sign the contract. You want to try and avoid that kind of situation.
Peter, that's wonderful wisdom. I can tell you've been doing this for a couple of years. What would you say are, three or four, whatever, however many you can name, kind of most peculiar legal issues on doing M&A transactions in China?
Well, obviously, when you do an M&A transaction, you're looking at number one, you start with due diligence. Okay. Fine. But maybe even before that, you start with a letter of intent. And the parties may discuss it and say they sign it. Well, there's a tendency on the Chinese side, when you sign the letter of intent, they think that that's a contract. Let's just start, working with each other and say, wait a minute, because in the international arena, in perhaps somewhat U.S.-centric here, you have a letter of intent, but it doesn't mean anything. It's non-binding, and that you say from the letter of intent, nothing goes forward until you have a definitive agreement. That's sort of the mentality. But on the Chinese side, oh, we have an agreement with letter of intent, and let's just start, buying, selling. Let's just start doing whatever. You got to keep that in mind. It's all with good intention, but the concept with timing is a little different. The second thing is, as I started to refer to at the outset, is due diligence. In the Western world, you're looking at due diligence in terms of, you have a litany of items and things you want to look into. You want to look at their corporate structure. You want to look at all of that. Well, you do the same thing in China, except for one thing. Nothing is what it appears on paper. You need to focus on not just due diligence, but you got to focus on the concept of forensic due diligence, forensic accounting. That's what you need to focus on, because everything you need to ask, why? Why is it like that? You need somebody that has the understanding, the experience to go beyond what's there. It's not just that you've got a receipt. Well, yeah, you got to look behind the receipt. The other thing you've got to keep in mind is that when you're making acquisition, if this be the case of state-owned assets, perhaps sometimes you would involve in that. Not all transactions are private. A lot of companies are owned by the Chinese government, or at least partially owned. Then you got to keep in mind certain aspects of this will require the Chinese government to approve that. The other thing is that China adopts the concept of a legal representative. A legal representative is the party that is legally responsible for the company. That particular party has legal responsibility, and unless the legal representative agrees to it, and the legal representative is the party that always keeps the chop. The chop is the Chinese stamp that indicates that there's legal authority, and they can bind the company if you put that stamp on a document. And so you have an agreement, you sign, and everything is cool. You're ready to move forward, and you've got the keys to the door, you're ready to move in. Not so fast, because you haven't changed the legal representative at the AIC, which is the Administration for Industry and Commerce, or other similar type of bureaucracy. You haven't done anything. It's almost like in real estate. In the U.S. and other places, you may purchase the property, but you also need to make sure that you record, that make the change, and to go through the process of getting the legal representative, the old legal representative out, and put in the new, is a process that usually the Chinese side will not do that until they've seen the money. Show me the money. You got to have the money, everything's signed, then you go in. And so you want to make sure that you've got sufficient guanxi relationship, sufficient confidence that after they've gotten the money, that they will change the legal representative. That's very important.
Oh, wow, very interesting. That is unusual for those of us in the U.S. and other Western countries. Okay. Are there any specific provisions you would find in sale purchase agreements in China, or just whenever you have a foreign buyer acquire a Chinese company, any sort of unique provisions, considerations for foreign buyers of Chinese companies?
Okay. In China, there are two different types of companies, in a sense. One is a wholly domestic company, and then one is what is known commonly as a wolfie, which is still a domestic legal person, but the investors, the shareholders, the owners is an international company. And so whenever you have an international company, meaning a non-Chinese, non-domestic company acquiring a Chinese company, the characterization of the company has changed, albeit it used to be certain licenses or honor or certain permits or different. These days, a lot of that has gone away. China wants to open up for business and wants to make and invite international companies to come in. And so a lot of the differences have been changed. But obviously, if you're acquiring, let's just say, a military related type of company or company that supplies or has contracts, then obviously the domestic company, that had that license now is acquired by an international company. Well, you want to make sure that if you make that acquisition, that the license to operate for a particular, what is known as a negative list, which means certain foreign companies are not allowed to own, then you want to make sure that it is still valid in certain aspects. As an example, the negative list or sensitive sector of business may include anything that involves the internet, okay, which is essentially e-commerce in many iteration. It may involve television, filming, and obviously all the obvious things, military or anything that might have a sensitive aspect to it. So when you're making an acquisition in your SPA, in your stock purchase agreement, you want to make sure that's the case. So that's one thing. The second thing is that very often the international company, the foreign party, acquires from the owner, even if it is in a private transaction, acquires the local company and say, great, you're the owner. Now I'm acquiring this, and I want to make sure you don't go out next door and start competing with us. Well, the answer is you got to be very careful. There's a lot of good law out there, or bad law, depending on your perspective, that says if you're going to acquire a company and you expect the owners or key individuals or employees to no longer be able to compete, you can write it down, but it will not be enforceable unless there is some obvious compensation that is paid to that individual. So these things you got to keep in mind. It's just not that you have a 75 paragraph that tells you that through the end of the world you cannot compete. Well, sorry, anytime that you sign an agreement in China, particularly one that has Chinese government involvement, you're not signing with the party. You're signing with three parties. You're signing it with your acquiree, and then you're signing it with the body of Chinese law that's involved. So that you need to keep in mind. Very often in a national purchase agreement, you have this thing called purchase price adjustment. You buy it for $10 million, and that should certain things occur, you have a purchase price going up or down or some kind of adjustment. Well, good luck. But China is very much a cash and carry, no money, no honey. And so you want it, you take it in, and we sell it to you, and then thereafter, well, very often, again, I don't want to say this is the case in every situation, but the purchase price adjustment is a big hassle in China. So you got to keep that in mind and understand what your business is, how you're going to interface, what the transition is going to be from you, from them to you, and then finally you got to figure out how is it going to occur? Because very often, if you are making an acquisition, the money is coming in, but let's just say in reverse, it is that you already have a company in China, and this has increasingly occurred, particularly with German or French or Italian companies and American companies that have been in China for many years, and a lot of them say, "Hey, what is it? No mas. Okay, I've had enough. I'm leaving." And they sell it to the local company. That's fine, no problem. You sell it to a local company, to a local investor, maybe even to your general manager that have been there, and say, "Fine, I'm getting out of China, and I'm gonna sell the company to you, and you have money." Well, how is that money going to get out? Okay, you certainly have an ability to get the money out, but it usually means you got to go get SAFE, which is State Administration on Foreign Exchange approval. But you can get it the first time because there's one lump sum. Then you have purchase price adjustment. How is that all going to work? Then you're going to be standing in line. So these are considerations you need to look into. Finally, and I'll make this short, is that there's this concept of preemptive rights of existing shareholders whenever you purchase a company in China. Let's just say you're buying a private company, there are 4 or 5 shareholders. Well, you want to make sure that you get complete understanding and clearance before you buy it, that the majority shareholder has already gone through the process of ensuring that the other parties have been offered first to purchase the company. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, well, this other guy decides," and so you had your 45 trips coming to China, Beijing, Shanghai, and then you say, "Well, I had a good tour," because the deal is not going to go through.
Peter, what a wonderful summary of doing business in China. I think any company doing business in China in any form should be hiring you as their lawyer. Thank you for spending time with us today. We'll see you next time, and thank you everyone for listening to this installment on cross-border M&A in China.
Thank you.
All right, Peter.
I'm sweating bullets.
Okay.